Welcome in the arena. My name's Allyson Klein. Today I woke up and I was excited about this interview. It's going to be a great one. We are here with Melissa Evers. She is the head of ecosystem and co-founder of Kreneon. Welcome, Melissa. I can't wait to dig into this story.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Melissa, before we get started, you and I have a shared history of engagement in the technology sector. Why don't you just give a little bit of background about you and how you found your way to being a co-founder of such a foundational force in the world of water, Krenon?
Well, thanks for having me. Yes, my career has taken a very interesting set of turns. I started out actually in wastewater remediation for ExxonMobil. I have a civil and environmental engineering degree from the University of Texas at Austin, hooked 'em. And so that is where I started my journey. I took a pretty hard left turn at one point and went and got my MBA and focused in finance and strategy because I really wanted to understand how the world was working around us. And then from finance and strategy, I went to Dell, I went to Intel. That's where our paths crossed. And then took another turn and really wanted to get into the business, had fallen in love with the role of software at Intel. It was really the ways in which the products that you and I worked on became real, became manifest. And so worked in software for a really, really long time. Climbed the ranks to vice president in software engineering, lots of time in the open source ecosystem, lots of work with a variety of different open source projects from Edge to web properties to Chrome OS to all kinds of different things. And so as I pivoted out of Intel, I wanted to look for opportunities that allow the integration of all of those experiences in a way, tackling an issue that I felt strongly about. And so the issue that Kreneon is tackling is the challenges of water scarcity that are affecting our planet. And how do we structurally change the game such that investment flows into water? And the pun is intended. There are so many water puns, but that investment flows into water generation and new technologies that will enable water to be much more plentiful and address some of the challenges that exist around the world. And so as the head of ecosystem at Kreneon, we are building a digital market platform to enable the commodification of water. And we believe that that is the key to unlocking the capital markets, broadly speaking.
Now, when you describe that, what I was thinking about is that you understand a few things so deeply. And I can see a confluence, no pun intended, between them. One is obviously you understand water from your engineering background and wastewater mitigation. The second is that you understand systems on a deep level, having worked at Intel and really thought about microprocessors and software stacks and how they work together. Complex system design is something that's inherent in you. And then you understand scale because you've worked at Intel and the Linux Foundation to deliver technology on such a amazing, span in terms of working across players and thinking about how you motivate folks. Now, I want to set the stage and why I decided to do this podcast. We're talking about the water crisis, and I have a huge belief that sustainability is one of our mandates. And when you described what you were taking on with the water crisis, it really opened my eyes. Tell me a little bit and set the stage for our audience about where we are with the water crisis and why this is such an existential crisis right now.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience because I think there is a general lack of awareness with regard to the challenges that our world faces with regard to water. Now, that's not entirely true if you happen to be in the desert southwest of the United States or in regions of this world that are affected by water scarcity. It is something that you know very, very clearly. But for the vast majority of folks across our planet that work in business and tech, I just don't think they really see it. So let me paint a little bit of that picture for you. So the water crisis is not a new story, right? If you look at the raw statistics associated with the challenges that the world has and water scarcity. According to UNICEF, 1 in 4 people on this planet today live without access to stable sources of clean water. 50% of the world's population, I'll say that again, 50% of the world's population today experiences water scarcity where they have a lack of access to clean water at least 1 month a year. So when you overlay that kind of relative human tragedy, it's also a macroeconomic challenge. When we look at water and the ways in which our world consumes water, 60% of global GDP is dependent upon water sources. Now, whether that be agriculture or whether that be, food and beverage, or whether that be farming, or whether that be manufacturing, if you look at some of the statistics around how much water is consumed by various industries, there's a lot of water that goes into things that we just consume every day. And we don't even think about the fact that there's so much water that is required to generate those goods and services. I know data centers and AI are headlines today, and for good reason, in the sense that communities are really becoming much more aware of their water sources and how those are being consumed. And I am really encouraged by the movement and the innovation from a technology perspective and the hyperscalers to really push and advance and take risks and place bets on, trying different types of cooling, or trying different types of water remediation, or, all kinds of things that are being innovated to drive down energy consumption, drive down water consumption. And I think that is our future. We will figure this out. We always have figured this out. But the reality is that we have a really significant challenge in that our consumption as a world with regard to our needs will outstrip the supply of water by about 40% in the next couple of years. The World Bank says by 2030, our needs are going to outstrip that of the supply. And so that equates to about $58 trillion of GDP risk. And that's a big deal. So when we think about, okay, how do we address this? We need to figure out how we conserve water, but we also need to figure out new sources and uses. And so looking at technologies like PFAS removal, or looking at various remediation technologies, atmospheric water generation, desalination, all of these technologies are coming to maturity at scale right now in a way that we've never seen before. And so what the gap that exists in order to really try to begin to address some of these challenges is getting capital to invest in those technologies and being able to provide those to the communities that need them.
Now, Melissa, one of the things that I found so striking, and you said a bunch of striking things in that opening statement, but one of the things I found so striking about Kreneon's position is that you say it's not a technology gap. You've just named some of the technologies that are coming to mass market. It's a financial gap. And you talk about private capital funds being at about 15% of water infrastructure today, while if you look at something like clean energy, that's about 75%. What's held private investment away from water in your estimation?
Well, I think it really comes down to a few things. One is there's a cultural expectation that harkens back to the beginning of humanity, that water is free. It is a gift from the heavens, and it just comes down, and therefore we should not have to pay for this. And so there's a cultural and inherent bias in our thinking with regard to the value of water that is absolutely inaccurate. You can talk to anybody that works in water, they will tell you water is not free. Nor should it be. Like we think about water as a human right. Absolutely, water is a human right. So is housing, and we have no shelter. We have no problem paying for shelter. So is food. We understand we need to pay for food. Being able to overcome this cognitive bias is a piece of it. But a very fundamental piece of it that's correlated is this notion that water is free, or that water is very low cost. And in some places in the world, it practically is. But in places in the world that do not have enough water, there is a very clear understanding that water has value and water has a price, and my survival or my business or my supply chain is dependent upon a secure supply of clean water. And so when we look at that capital gap, like why aren't people investing? Why is private industry not investing in building out water supplies? Because the technology is there. It comes down to a lack of price transparency. If you think back to the era of before, well, when you and I were little,
Mhm. Before Gen Z. Okay.
back in the 70s, there was an oil crisis, and
Mhm.
oil had not been commodified. We didn't have Brent, we didn't have WTI, we didn't know the price of a barrel in a global standard. So people could not figure out, oh, should I build this pipeline? Should I not? Should I build this well? Should I not? Because the ROI was really unclear. When you introduce price transparency, when you introduce global, visible, transparent supply and demand, you get a sense for like, oh, shoot, I am sitting on this asset. I could monetize this asset if I could get it out of the ground and I can move it over there. All of these things become very fundamental finance calculations. If you have price transparency and you have standardized commodified units that the world understands. And so that's really what we are doing with Kreneon, is being able to introduce those same structures that have worked so well to enable capital expansion and innovation, whether it be the oil sector, whether it be renewable energy, whether it be way back in the day, wheat. Wheat used to not be commodified, and it was price spikes that were like 100x because
Right.
it was just not understood with regard to locality and demand. We hope that we will be able to neutralize that through our platform and be able to deliver that price transparency so capital investment can have confidence with regard to the future cash flows that are going to come from the investments that they make.
Now, when I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about, plain settlers of Catan, and we understand that there's trade between commodities. But more seriously, there are commodities exchanges for everything. Um, what is it going to take to actually get water to have a standard like what you described with the standard barrel of oil?
Yes. So there's a couple things that are essential for commodification. One is a standardized unit, just as you cited with a barrel of oil, right? You need a
Mhm.
standard size to be declared as the unit that will be transacted against. And our belief and contention is that that will probably emerge as a cubic meter of water.
Mhm.
But translation into acre feet versus gallons versus the other denominations that exist across the planet is not hard math.
Mhm.
It can be done. And so, whether it be 1,000 cubic meters or a cubic meter or a million cubic meters, some denomination of a metric cubic system will probably be where we land with regard to the standard size unit. After you have a standard size unit, you need to be able to have that price transparency, and you need to be able to assess that water based upon, or the commodity based upon the qualities of that commodity. So there are differences in pricing within the context of the oil markets or solar energy markets. There are premiums that are paid based upon the particular quality of the product in that size and standard instrument, as well as various other factors, supply and demand factors. I can get this to you tomorrow, and I need it tomorrow, right? So there's various other ways in which premiums will be ascribed. But fundamentally, what we will be doing is measuring at the source and in a tested, verified manner to create those assets on a digital registry with all of that metadata, whether it be water basin, sorry, or whether it be, this was atmospheric water generation, so it has a really, really high level of purity, whatever the criteria or classifications of that water are. What are the regulatory obligations that this water has? We will capture that as well. And that will go into how the market then prices that water, both from a forward contracts perspective with fixed pricing or variable pricing based upon excess supply.
Now, I know that Kreneon is really busy in actually working around the world with areas where we could actually turn this into a tradable asset. What is the process by which you're working with across government, NGOs, water supply sources, etc., to drive to a model of transparent pricing?
Yes, so this is a global conversation. And so being designed as a financial instrument from the get-go to meet global markets is something that we're very, very focused on. And so our conversations with sovereigns, we have about 9 different countries that we're having conversations with, both from a regulatory perspective, how do you create a financially traded commodified asset out of water? And what does that exchange need to look like, and that sort of thing. But also with regard to their particular water regulations, their particular water challenges, with how they are innovating with regard to scarcity and how Kreneon can step in and intermediate those contracts or address critical needs where there is a backlog of demand and there has not been project financing available because of lack of price transparency. So we are in conversations with a number of different players across the United States as well as other parts of our world, really trying to understand all of these complexities. And we believe that because that we're following a standard playbook that has been applied lots of different times, that we can leverage those learnings and build a system that will scale. But to your comment with regard to my experience and background, that's really what I did at Intel, but it's what the Intel playbook is too, right? Taking markets that are complex and highly verticalized and figuring out how do you deliver standard horizontal, in the context of Intel compute layers, but in the context of this, we're talking about market infrastructure to enable that capital to be unlocked. And so that's really where we're focused right now. We are at TRL4 and looking at in-field pilots throughout the summer at a variety of different locations and different types of conditions and different types of water generation facilities. And then we'll be moving into that standardization process shortly.
Now, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about another area that I spend a lot of time thinking about, which is power generation and power delivery, and the concept of a kilowatt hour of power having a variable price in different regions because of, how the power is generated and what it takes to actually deliver that power. Do you see the same thing happening with water, where different regions or different sources of water might carry different price points, or are you really seeking a standardized price around the world similar to a barrel of oil?
Absolutely, we'll see different pricing.
Okay.
The cost of water generation will vary based on a lot of different factors, including the technology that generates it, the energy that's required to do that generation, the location, the scarcity. If water is being generated in an area where industrial supply chains have been disrupted, you're going to see a significant price premium for that water that's generated. So water will definitely have different pricing. And in fact, oil does too. What we see on the ticker as a global, kind of denominator of oil is, $105 per barrel or whatever, is an amalgamation of all that data across the world.
Okay, got it.
But what you will see is intermediate exchanges, which is how commodities are traded today that are based in regions. And that's how electricity is delivered. For example, it's not like, hey, I have this electron and that was generated at Niagara Falls and I need it in Las Vegas. It's not like we moved that electron. There are intermediate trading points with intermediate pricing that is negotiated along the way such that that electron or a electron gets to Las Vegas as needed. And we'll see a very similar thing happen with water.
Got it. Now, so much of establishing a market is trust and supply. And obviously water is vast and within the context of even desalinization, it might be the process is more important and the ability to deliver that process is more important than the root supply of water. How do you create trust in the supply chain so that a market can mature?
Yeah, it's such a great question. There's a couple factors of that. One is that we are building trust in the asset as it's measured at the source. So unlike other markets like the carbon credit market, et cetera, which was based upon essentially mathematical calculations of about this much carbon was removed from, or offset by this activity. This is measured down to the molecule. This is how much was created, and so we have trust with regard to the assets creation at the get-go. So that's a very differentiating element for one.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that when you begin to have these contracts and you have these commodification agreements, the buyer will likely buy something like a power purchase agreement. We're calling it a water purchase agreement, a virtual water purchase agreement, where the supplier is committing to, I will deliver you, 100,000 cubic meters per year for the next 5 years. And the buyer is like, and this is the price that I will pay for that commitment and secure supply. So they have a contractual obligation, and this is not unique to water commodity markets. This is the way commodity markets work. So if that water purchase agreement is put in place and then the supplier fails to meet that obligation, there are contractual terms that are established in the contract that specify how reparations will be made. And usually they're fairly expensive. So usually once you've established a commodity market and a commodity contract, there's not a lot of folks who fail to deliver. And so, there's a bunch of different mechanisms, from financial instrumentation to standardized contracts to trust in the assets creation from the get-go versus estimation, that will all lead to trust and integrity, transparency with this market's creation. And I think that's really, really important, because if we fail to establish trust and we fail to create an environment of transparency, we will not succeed.
Now, one of the most interesting things that I read about your company is that you're giving this vision of builders getting a futures price, if you will, so that banks can actually issue debt towards projects rather than relying on equity to fund water infrastructure. Tell me why that's so important.
Yes. So it turns out that it's quite magical from a financial perspective. We have some models. So if anybody's interested in going downtown with me, hit me up on LinkedIn or whatever, and we'll go through it. But when you have a certainty of future cash flows, it lowers the risk associated with that particular investment. And so you can get insurance for the investment. You can't, which folks struggle to do today, and that's part of the reason banks won't finance, is because they can't get insurance. So it lowers your cost of capital by a considerable margin by doing so. It also changes the structure by which what used to be an expense and a depreciation of that capital becomes an ongoing R&D expense moving forward. And so from a tax treatment perspective, there's also beneficial consequences associated with just the financial structure of these arrangements. And that's why, there's been such a massive explosion in energy investment with renewable energies and solar and wind. And that's why then you see this cost curve, the unit cost curve with regard to those installations goes down because the demand's up, volume's up, all of these business playbooks that we're also familiar with, right? Unit cost, unit economics goes down, a supply chain gets more robust, drives the unit economics down even further, right? All of these good things start happening once you get that demand spike. And so all of these pieces start layering in and stacking to create a very favorable environment for future investment and future innovation. New technologies will be born with regard to water for purification and water generation. And so it's that virtuous cycle that we're so familiar with in many parts of manufacturing and technology is what we want to deploy and unleash in the context of water itself.
I love that. Now, your title is head of ecosystem, which seems kind of like, okay, that's great. until you really realize what you're doing, which is you're bringing all of these folks, producers, banks, regulators, buyers, to a table in which they've never wanted to go before. You have a prodigious task in front of you. Melissa, how do you do that? And what are you seeing in terms of the progress of getting folks together to have these tough conversations about, setting a common price for water?
The interesting thing is that we're making really rapid progress.
Mm-hmm.
And while water has historically been a highly verticalized, bespoke, local, custom conversation, the challenges associated with financing and price transparency are underlie so much of the challenges in the industry. And so when we come to the table and say, we're gonna do this, and every water investment you have just got a ton more valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People are like, oh, I didn't even, some folks are like, I didn't even realize this was the underlying issue, but oh my gosh, this is the underlying issue. And some people have been staring at this issue for quite some time. We talked to quite a few water producers, folks who have technologies to generate water. They have a backlog of municipal projects or projects on reservations or projects in various communities that they have not been able to finance. Like, they've got the MOU signed, the municipality's on board, but the municipality can't fund and finance this much of an investment. There's all these kinds of things. And so they just get stuck. And so we come in and we say, like, hey, we are going to be able to attest to the value of this future asset that you are creating. We are going to work with these communities to get virtual, water purchase agreements in place. And then the banks are like, yes, please. That's good. So it's actually, while it is challenging, no doubt, and it's challenging because it has been so verticalized, and it's challenging because the players are so diverse. It is also something that we're taking a known playbook to a market that desperately needs it. And people are like, okay, I get it. Let's go. So it's actually moving much more quickly than any of us ever anticipated.
I would never bet against you, Melissa. So I think that this is something where I can't wait to see the progress and the beachheads that actually move forward with this. And, like the final place that I want to go with you is where your vision for this is, and where the founders of Kreonon's vision is for this. You talked about the crisis that's heading towards us by 2030, and the humanitarian impact of that crisis is being felt today. We may not feel it in the Pacific Northwest where water is ample, but it's obviously being felt all over the world. When you look out over 5 years and you think, okay, I'll give you 5 years. I'll give you 2031 instead of 2030. What is the difference that you want to see in the world around how the world finances and values water?
So I'll give you the 5-year version, but I'll also give you a longer version as well.
Okay.
The 5-year version looks like we have a global established asset that is traded on a global exchange that reflects the value of water and reflects the regionality as well as the quality, as well as the generation and the basin and scarcities. We have data that is transparent and visible globally, by which financial institutions can make sound business decisions. That is going to be absolutely in place in 5 years. What that unlocks is a movement towards water generation and new water generation technologies, new water purification technologies that will be truly revolutionary. One of the folks we were talking to said, every single municipality that is sitting on excess supply just bought a huge multi-million-dollar asset, multi-billion-dollar asset, depending on how much water they're talking about, on their balance sheet that they can figure out what they want to do with. It will be revolutionary for a lot of markets and a lot of places across this world. It will be revolutionary for the markets that are experiencing water scarcity today. So if we look at the 10-year plus horizon, I hope our children are looking at a time where they're like, what do you mean there used to not be enough water? Like, I don't get it. Like,
Mhm.
I, I'm not tracking with you, mom. Like, it'll be one of those things like you pull up a phone. Like, what the hell do you do with this thing, right? I want our children or our grandchildren to be in that space where water scarcity is not something this planet has to worry about. And I believe that's possible. I believe that we can get to a place where that is our future, through conservation, through a number of different means. But I think Kreneon and unlocking capital private investment in water is going to be a big piece of that.
I love it. I think it reflects everything that it actually takes to solve a challenge. And I love the work that you're doing at Kreneon. I'm sure that our audience wants to learn more and they want to engage. Where would you send them to learn more about Kreneon and engage with your team?
Absolutely. So our website's the best place to engage with getting to know more about our company. We have some white papers that have been published around different pieces of this challenge and why we believe what we're building is our path forward. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, hit me up, say hi. I would love to have a conversation with you, even if you're not in the water space, but you care about this issue. Um, it it it's going to take all of us rowing together to sort this out. So I'm all about building relationships. So either way, website, you can sign up for the newsletter, whatever the case may be. But I'd love to I'd love to contact you.
Thank you so much for your time and thanks for taking on this bold challenge. It can make a real difference in the world. So wonderful to spend some time with you, Melissa.
Thank you. Thanks, Allison. It was so good to see you.